it's really kind of absurd what we expect grieving people to be able to do in the days and weeks and first few months after this cataclysmic experience they've been through. If their house burned down, we wouldn't expect them to do that kind of stuff. If they live through natural disasters of one kind or another, we wouldn't expect that. Even in some cases, I think we're gentler when someone has a baby, in the birth, in those few weeks after birth, 6 weeks after birth, than we are when someone is going through a grieving process. But I do think that we could hold it very similarly to someone who's like, they need the food train after they've given birth. They need someone to like help with the laundry. They need someone to help bring them things or get things or do things for them. And as grievers, we need that too. I don't know if it's fair to use the word incapacitated, but for many of us, that's how powerful our grief is. That it's hard to do anything else. And so, like you're saying, whatever we can take off of the proverbial plate of someone in the early weeks and months of their grieving process can be such a kindness, such a useful way to support them. Welcome to Full-Time Grievers, the podcast for people who aren't pretending we're over it. I'm Nathan M. McTagg, co-founder of the Center for Emotional Education and a grief specialist. Here, we talk about what it really takes to survive bereavement, how to move not on, but forward. Tune in for stories, tools, and truth-telling from me and other full-time grievers learning to live through loss without abandoning ourselves. Thank you for being here and for showing up in whatever way is right for you today. I'm Nathan M. McTagg, and this is Full-Time Grievers. Today, I'm going to be talking with Karen Hollenbeck. She's the creator of Wavecrest Wellness, where she shares her gifts in sound therapy and biofield tuning, Reiki, meditation, and breathwork. She has a background in critical care as a paramedic for over 15 years. She's been a wildland firefighter, she's a mom, and she surfs. She's also a fellow full-time griever. I've been interested to speak with Karen because she spent a good portion of her life working at the intersection of life and death, quite literally. And as someone who supports people in moments of intense catastrophe, perhaps loss of life, and also someone who supports people whose loved ones have passed, while being someone navigating her own grief, I really wanted to give us all the chance to hear some of Karen's perspective. So thanks so much for being here, Karen. I feel so glad we're getting the chance to chat.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Before we get into anything else, would you be willing to just tell us a little about who you're grieving and the relationship that you've had with them? I know you're grieving multiple folks in your family.
Yeah, yes, I am grieving multiple folks. Mostly my little brother Davey, that was the most recent, and that was definitely the one that hit the hardest. But it really all started back in 2019. I lost another brother. His name's Peter. And yeah, he died by suicide. So that was a really particularly awful one. And he was 21 years old. So that was the first hit, and then went through a friend, and then both grandparents, my horse that I really loved, and then in 2023 it was my other brother Davey, and that was a closer relationship because I lived with him growing up, and so it just hit a lot harder. And it was about 3 years ago now. So um, yeah.
So I hadn't realized, I knew some of your story before, but I hadn't realized the proximity, the closeness of, 2019 to 2023. That's just, a few short years for all of these major losses. Gosh, feeling extra compassion just realizing that part. You mentioned, not just your two brothers, your friend, your grandparents, your horse. It goes without saying that we each have our own relationship, our own kind of relationships with each of the different people in our life, and those relationships aren't necessarily always comparable. But because you've been through and are going through kind of multiple grieving processes, you have some way of comparing things that many of us don't. So I'm just curious if you can speak to some of the ways that grieving maybe your two brothers or the different people that you named, maybe even including your horse, have been different for you, have landed different for you.
Yeah. Thanks for asking about my horse too, because God, that was so brutal, and I
Yeah.
almost skipped over that grief. I mean, I kinda did because I was reeling from so much other stuff, but I loved my horse. Yeah, and so first with Peter, he was adopted from, an orphanage in Russia when he was 2. So he had a lot of trauma and his whole life was very, very difficult. He lived with my dad and stepmom. So I never lived with him, but we were very close. And he was sent to a lot of boarding schools and put on a lot of medications. He basically had very little peace in his life. And him and I had a really close and loving relationship. But when he died, at first it was really shocking, but I it was it was sooner for me to get some feeling of peace from it because he just never had any peace in his life. And I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
it was so sad because I could see his potential if he had just stayed alive. I think that he had the potential to find some peace and happiness in this life, but he was 21 years old and he still just hadn't found that. So so that was really hard, but it's just always so different when it's suicide. My grandma was one of my closest relationships in my life. She was really like my big safe place. I was first going to say my supporter, but more than that, she was my real safe place. And so that was really awful, but she was 89 years old. So it's more natural, but it still was just so hard for me. I missed her, and she still had a lot of life and a lot of spark in her. So it was just hard to see her gone. And my grandfather was also 89 and he he was very scared to die, so
Hmm.
that was, um, I mean, that was hard in its own way too. Yeah, all very different processes. I don't even know where in that mix my horse was. Everything became such a blur because I also had little kids. My kids were when all this started, my kids were 2 and 4 when my brother Peter died. So everything is a little blurry. My horse dying was just, like, shocking and just like, "Oh, how could another thing happen?" Especially when she was my reprieve.
Right.
So, yeah, and, so I was feeling pretty, beaten down by that point, pretty, like, stretched to my limit. So Davy, he was 28 when he died, and he died in his sleep, uh, presumably from a seizure because he had had seizures before. But they were well managed, and I mean, it was so shocking. It was out of all of them, I was in complete disbelief. Complete that this was the only one where I had this absolute denial. Like, no, this is wrong. This didn't happen. This is like against nature. This can't happen. I was in denial about it for a very long time. Still sometimes I feel like, God, is that real? Like, how is he actually gone? So, and he was really kind of felt like a soul twin to me. We just really understood each other. He was just one of the closest people in my life, and we understood each other and just made each other laugh so much. So it really felt like something was like a part of my heart was torn away. So yeah, they were all very different
Yeah.
experiences to go through for sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate the nuance with which you're able to speak to that, because I think it's easy for people to assume that, oh, like anybody close to us that we lose, we're going to go through kind of the same thing. And you hear, like the mythos around the stages of grief. Okay, you're grieving someone, everybody goes through these stages, and we as grievers, we know that's not true. But I think it's so important for people to hear, you know each time we go through a loss, it has all of its own elements, all of its own parts, and idiosyncrasies that make it its own whole experience. You really speak to, like kind of peace that you were hoping for, or kind of feeling possible for Peter, like the sort of that he didn't get to live to that, but that maybe he found some of that, in the end, or in the afterlife. How your grandma was your rock, how your grandfather was afraid to pass, like all of these different pieces. The shock around your horse, the even more, as far as denial, like you're saying around Davy. It just really shows, I think, for those of us, who don't have the kind of experience that you do, and I hope that not many people do have that kind of experience. But it shows like how each of these experiences can be so different. And you think you know what it's like to go through grief or to go through a grieving process, but each one is so different. And so I really appreciate you just being willing to share with us those parts, even though it's painful. It touches on the individuality of your grief. So thank you so much for being willing to let us see that through you. I know you also have, you know, you have experience that many of us don't have, but that I think is also really important for us to explore. Having worked in emergency medicine, in some of our most kind of structure heavy, protocol driven institutions, when you were in the middle of your own grief and, pick a grieving process, one of the ones you went through, maybe Davy, since it was the biggest one for you, or the most challenging one. When you were in the middle of your own grief, did you have a sense, how did those systems that you were a part of help you? Maybe how did they work against you too?
Yeah. Well, after both Peter and Davy, I did take some time off. Neither one of them felt like enough time. When I went back to work after Peter died, everyone was so thoughtful of me because of the way that he had died. Everyone was really jumping in to protect me, to not go on those calls. And that was huge. I
Yeah.
actually not I didn't go on any suicide calls for quite a while. People would just jump in and take them, which was good because that would have been really terrible. But
Yeah.
we also respond to a lot of calls for suicidal ideations, and that was very different after Peter passed away, because and really for me as a paramedic, the biggest change was after Peter passed away because prior to that, I had a shield of armor. I would just go into scenes and just boom, 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 what needs to be done. And I was really good at my job. I didn't get involved in a lot of feelings before, during, or after if it was an adult. With kids, every first responder, it's terrible going on any sort of call with kids, but I really had a real solid shield of armor. I felt like protecting me from going there emotionally, which really served me as a paramedic. But when Peter died, there was something that happened that shield was just blown off. And also, I feel like I particularly had a heart shield before, and that probably like some childhood trauma and things like that. I had a heart shield in life, not just as a first responder. That was also blown open when Peter died. I just opened up and I just felt things and I had a new level of empathy that I could not compartmentalize. So going on like a suicidal ideation call, I mean, the person has intent or thoughts to harm themselves and I'm right in the back of the ambulance to the hospital with them, and we have protocols on what we ask and things we say, but I just came at that with like a completely different lens cuz now I had this real empathy, and I was like, gosh, I have, maybe it's just 5 minutes I have with this person or 10 minutes, but like I can hold some space for them and show them empathy, and I can listen if they want to share anything. So I came into that sort of situation with a lot more presence. And also I just longed for them to see their light and their potential as I could see it, because that's how I felt about Peter too. So, so that was kind of what happened after Peter, but then after Davy, so I did take a month off of work after Davy died. I was not ready to go back to work after a month. And I was going back. They had asked me to be a shift supervisor, and I had just trained for that, and then he died, and then so I went back, and it was like one of my first shifts as a shift supervisor. And when you're in that role, you're not on the ambulance, you're on an SUV by yourself, but you're kind of overseeing everything, but you respond to all the really bad calls. Not as like the first one in, not the first one with your hands on the patient, but you respond to all the CPR calls, all the bad car accidents. And my first day back after Davy died, it was just like the worst, absolutely worst shift. It was like CPR after CPR after CPR, and I mean, I don't even know how I got through that day. It felt so traumatizing. Just like when you're saying to yourself, I can't do this, but yet I'm driving to the call, I'm on the radio responding. Just, it felt pretty terrible, actually.
So I I hear like sort of the structural piece of that you were able to take some time off and come back to your position in both cases. That's pretty amazing by itself. Though I definitely also hear you could have used more time. And I know that's true for so many of us. If we do get any kind of grief leave, it's often way shorter than we need. But I hear that you got that support. I love hearing the way your own team kind of rallied around you to make sure that you didn't have to do those kind of calls after Peter died. That's that. I can really. That's just a level of kindness that goes above and beyond, right? That team surrounding you that way, supporting you that way. I hear too, like having to work with yourself. Like as you would go back in there and you'd have to go to those kind of calls, and then as the supervisor going to those really kind of important calls, that sort of transitions into some of what I'm wondering too about, like, for yourself. Like, there's the structure of the work and the protocols that you do at work and how that's supposed to support you and the people that you're there to help. But then I know you also have training in, keeping your cool in really emergent situations, right? Staying regulated when you need to. When you were going through, maybe the more acute periods of your grief or earlier in the grieving processes, did that training, were you able to stay regulated? Was it harder? I know you talked about your shields, your armor, and the challenges with that, but did your relationship to being the, like, leader and regulated person in those emergency situations shift at all? What was that like for you?
Yeah, surprisingly, my training held. I think it's kind of things that we think that we can't do, somehow we just find ourselves doing them. I don't know. I always think about the people who are, like, walking from Honduras to the United States. It's like, they probably don't think they can do the next day, but they just do. And and so I just kinda did things that I didn't think I could do. I remember the first time, because when I came back to work after Davy died, I was in that supervisor role, but sometimes I would jump on the ambulance and work a shift as a paramedic. I quickly realized that that did not work for me anymore because my first shift back on the ambulance, so I'm a paramedic, I'm with an EMT basic, and all the ambulances are out on other calls and tones go off and it's a seizure call, and I remember it was an 8-year-old boy in seizure. And Davy was around that age when he had his first seizure. So I'm just like, and there's no one else who can take the call for me. So and we're driving to the call, and I'm just saying to my partner, I'm like, I can't do this. Oh, this is terrible. I can't I can't do this. I just said, they knew the deal, and I was like, I'm gonna be a mess. I don't know. But we walked in the door, and yeah, the training just took over. Just like protocols,
Hmm.
airway, breathing, circulation, vital signs, assessment, interventions, IV, medications. It's just like boom, 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 boom. Like, just do it. So that's what happened. I felt like I couldn't do it until I walked in the door, and then I did it. So that's great. I did it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then
It's amazing.
yeah, but then afterwards, it was just like this new level of exhaustion. Like, oof, like it just felt awful. So I did several ambulance shifts, and then between just all the triggering stuff and I mean, I never used to feel like I can't do this going to a call. Prior to all this, I always felt like, yeah, I got this. Like, yep, we're hearing all these terrible details, car wreck and all this stuff. But it's like, no, I'm trained. I can do this. And then at that point, it was not so much. I knew I could, but I didn't want to. So I just stepped into the supervisor role, and that's what I do all the time now. And of course, if I need to do real paramedic stuff, I can, but I still have the training. But I think the biggest problem now is just that empathy thing. It's really hard to do this job when you're opened up and you don't have all that protection and that ability to compartmentalize. You really have to be able to compartmentalize. And now it's a lot better role for me as a supervisor because now, on a CPR call, once we have everything going, we're running the call, I usually step aside and talk to family members because we're all kind of trained to
Mm.
do that. But I actually really feel like, yeah, I can do this. I can actually talk to these people, and I'm not scared to. So yeah, my training held, but I think it was just more afterwards. It just felt like this is too much. Can't do this anymore.
Yeah. It's fascinating. I can really relate. Never had to do the kind of emergency work that you do, but supporting my clients. I was back to doing calls within a week or two, and I could do the calls and I could be there and be present for the call. But then, pretty much as soon as the call was over, I would have to go and like recover. So I can really relate to the like capacity that your nervous system has kind of changing, where you felt that exhaustion after in those after you would go and do the call, whereas maybe before you didn't notice that, or didn't have that level of exhaustion come up. And then also just recognizing the way you are now, having gone through what you've gone through, you know, going in there and doing the paramedic work the way you used to is not, it's not what's right for you anymore. And I also hear that's really, really striking to hear the part about the empathy and how it became a little bit of a liability, or maybe a lot of a liability, going and doing the actual calls. But in the supervisor role, where then you talk to the family, it's a real asset, real powerful thing that you're able to bring now because of what you've been through. That's that's really striking.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's like, damn empathy.
Right? I know. Oh. And at the same time, what a superpower too for those people that you're now able to bring it to. And I know, like, so you also developed, you moved into some other work as a result of the changes you were going through, and your grieving processes and what you were learning through them and what was helping you. So you like kind of moved into the sound healing and the Reiki and meditation and breath work. It's I also find that really interesting. Not only, I mean, I think it's really normal for grievers to begin to offer the support that was really meaningful for us when we were going through our, the more acute parts of our own grieving process, to then become a practitioner of that kind of art and or support service, and give it to others. I think happens for a lot of us. But for you, it really, it sort of, it is this, I don't know, it sort of furthers the trajectory and the discussion that you were talking about of how your nervous system was changing, and where the empathy was painful and hard for you to work with in the on the paramedic calls. It really served you in the supervising role. And I think in your sound healing work and in your Reiki work, it's like probably one of your most powerful tools, right? And so I know you moved into doing more of that work, sound healing and the Reiki, even though you're still affiliated with the paramedics, and you still do that work too. Sound healing and Reiki aren't yet things that most people would really think of reaching for in the middle of acute grief. But through your experience, both as someone who received them and now as someone who offers those services, what would you say is it that those practices can offer us that, say, talking and reflecting just can't?
Yeah. Well, I think the easiest way for me to talk about it is my own experience. So
Sure.
we went down a few months actually after Davy died. My family and I, we moved to Puerto Rico for a year. And that was something that was already planned. So while in Puerto Rico, I started going to sound baths, and I found them to be incredibly healing in my own grief. And a sound bath, for those who don't know, it's you just lay down on like yoga mat, and the person plays crystal Himalayan bowls, gongs, drums, chimes. So you just lay there and listen to all these sound frequencies. And the goal is really like deep relaxation, but it can put you into different brainwave states. So, slowed down from the beta that we're normally in to alpha or theta, so meditative states, or I would get really deeply into theta, which is a very daydreamy, creative state, a really regenerative state. But so I found myself going to these sound baths and I would drop into theta and I would really process my grief in new ways, very healing ways. I would kind of have go into these daydreams about my brother, about Davy most of the time. And I would just find so much like peace and understanding and integration. So I started going to those more and more from this lady, Emily, who ended up being my teacher. So she taught me how to do sound baths. I took a whole sound healing class from her. And then she also does Reiki. I received Reiki from her, and that it's really just like electromagnetic energy, like life force energy, prana, chi, whatever you want to call it. But Reiki is just very simple, just like laying hands on a client. And for me, since Davy died, I had had a ball of anxiety in my solar plexus with I think was related to not wanting to feel all my feelings fully. I really thought I was feeling them fully, but that ball of anxiety, I think that there was just like there were little corners in my mind, little pieces that I think I wouldn't allow myself to feel, and Reiki really helped replace that ball of anxiety with just a feeling of very calm peace. And so both of those I learned from her and really helped me a lot. And once I came back to Montana, I started my business and started practicing both of those. And then I stumbled on biofield tuning, which is a type of sound therapy, but it's much more specific. And I have also received a lot of biofield tuning sessions. Every session's different, and so not every session was about grief, but the ones that I've received that did cue in on my grief, they really found those blind spots. So, just a quick overview of what that is. So, in biofield tuning, I'm using acoustic frequencies of tuning forks and bouncing that sound off the body kind of like sonar and listening to the ping back. And that ping back that I'm listening to is really the frequency signature of emotional patterns. So every emotion sounds different when it's coming through the harmonic frequencies of a tuning fork. So you can hear fear, you can hear alarm, you can hear sadness. And they're like patterns of tension and resistance in and around the body that have kind of become stuck, usually due to resistance of not wanting to feel them or we weren't able to fully process them at the time. And so we come across these pockets of dissonance and just kind of stay with them until they're able to entrain to the coherent frequency of the tuning fork. So it's kind of like energy that's been stuck gets put back into circulation. And for me, receiving biofield tuning, it found the the one thing that I really didn't want to address was because I've processed a lot with my grief. I feel like I've really gone there. I really like felt the feelings because I also went through emotional sovereignty school at the same time I was learning biofield tuning. So spent a lot of time feeling the feelings, but the one thing that the tuning forks were able to find was my resistance to letting go of the heavy burden of my grief. It's kind of like there's a part of me that feels like I need to hold on to that and carry it around with me. And so what the I had one in particular biofield tuning session that I received where it was clear that I was being asked to let go of the heavy burden aspect of my grief and allow
Mm.
myself to feel some joy again. And my first reaction was like, "No." like like how can I feel joy? Like real joy, like innocent, childlike, playful joy. Like, how can I feel that? And that but it's been kind of clear that, it's been 3 years since he died and it's like that is something that might become available again. So, yeah, I think the premise with all these things of biofield tuning and any sound therapy, sound healing, Reiki, it's, emotions get stuck in our bodies. We resist them, we stuff them down. It's part of our society. And, it's like better out than in. Like, find it, be with it, let it out. And yeah, kind of goes hand in hand with all the emotional sovereignty school stuff for sure.
Full-Time Grievers is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education, home of Emotional Sovereignty School and Neuro-Emotional Coaching. If you're learning to live through loss and to stay connected to yourself along the way, our programs offer practical tools for nervous system support, emotional processing, and the kind of healing that doesn't rush you to move on. You can learn more at centerforemotionaleducation.com. And if you'd like to help keep this podcast ad light and listener supported, you can contribute or simply share this episode with someone who needs it. And thanks. I know you're a practitioner, and I've actually benefited from some of your amazing work, and I do think that it's something that everyone should experience, whether you're going through a grieving process or not. It can be really supportive. But I love hearing your own experience. I think that's really so meaningful, and obviously something you can speak to with even more knowing than someone else's experience. So appreciate you framing it that way. I also really appreciate you mentioning that ball of anxiety. So many of us have anxiety in our grieving process, and it's not something that's talked about very often or very well, I think. So I really appreciate you mentioning that too, and normalizing that for folks listening, because I know many of us have something like that come up, especially when it's someone who is like like a twin like that, or someone that we're so connected to. For them to not be here, it's really so normal for us to have some anxiety come up around that. And really appreciate that you were able to get some support with that part too, as you're working with your grief and your grieving process. Also, just love hearing again, like the little subtleties and details of your own experience. Speaking of like support that we can get, support that you now offer folks, there are versions of support that grievers get, from our family, from workplaces, even from healthcare providers, that can actually make things harder. So, in your experience, what can that look like? What do you think? Why do you think we keep doing that?
Oh, people are just so uncomfortable with your grief. It's like they think you're gonna suck them in or something. I would say, society does an okay job of supporting people, maybe for about a month. I mean, really, probably only 2 weeks, but maybe about a month. You get your time. Oh, they're grieving, but that kind of runs out, and then I feel like a lot of people try to offer solutions. And this is people who have experienced grief as well. For a while, I thought, well, if somebody has experienced really deep grief themselves, then they would kind of know what I'm going through and they would be able to be supportive in the way that I would like to be supportive. But that's not true because our society teaches you to stuff down all your emotions, including grief. So So if they experienced grief and they stuffed it down, then they're not going to be very tolerant of you being patient with yourself, taking time off work, feeling all the feelings. No, it's kind of like, hey, your month's up. Like, get back at it. Like, yeah. So I feel like, then people start to offer solutions like, no, everything happens for a reason. Like, that is
Hmm.
not the
Maybe you should
context.
go to a grief support group.
Yeah, or I got after this was about, probably about a month and a half after Davy died, someone recommended, "Well, why don't you just get on some medication for a while just to take the edge
Hmm.
off?" Like, this isn't a chemical imbalance, like, my brother just died. I'm really sad. But it was kind of like this message of, "Hey, whatever you need to do to get back in line with society, do your job, be a mom, do all the things that everyone's expecting of you, because like, you had your time. So now it's time to stuff your feelings like everyone else." Yeah, we don't do very good.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that. Gosh, yeah. I mean, I appreciate the way that you like you're able to kind of track it, and I've heard so many other grievers say similar things. I had similar experience too. That if the whatever memorial services or funeral services are sooner, then support drops off sooner. But yeah, that month mark is often a real breaking point for the support that we were getting and now are no longer getting. And yeah, too, I hear what you're saying, and I hadn't really thought about how other people who've been through their own grieving process and have had to do some stuffing, or maybe that's all they knew to do, then it can be really activating for them to be around someone who's not doing as much stuffing or getting back to normal as quickly. And so I really hadn't thought about how that might inform some of the response we get from people who even know what it's like to go through a grieving process themselves. And oh gosh, I can identify with, like if I like having a pain or having something that went wrong for me, and then seeing someone else and having a different version and kind of being like, hey, like you're supposed to like stuff it too, or whatever. You're supposed to like just get back to work and make like nothing happen too. You're supposed to keep going. I had to keep going. You have to keep going. I can
Yeah.
really feel into how that would show up for people, even though they wouldn't necessarily want to be, coming at us that way. I hear too. I can also relate the part, where it shifts from, oh, this, I see, this is so awful for you. I hope you feel better or whatever. To, you really should do something. Like I'm going to give you some advice now. Here's some ideas of what you need to go do with your grief over there, so it's not over here by me anymore. Gosh, and too, I also want to say, of course, for anyone listening, if you needed to do medication, or if you needed to do some stuffing, or if you needed to like sweep things back up in a certain way and get back to work sooner than was right for you, like your grieving process is your grieving process. There's no judgment here for anyone navigating it in the way that they needed to, and that's different from the kind of things that we then hear ourselves when we're going through our own grieving process. So I really appreciate how you speak to your own experience and things that, were less useful for you. What would you say it would look like, or what's one way it could look for our families, our communities, our culture to actually hold a griever well? Not perfectly, but usefully.
Yeah. Uh, I feel like my kids are just such a great example. They are 9 and 11 now, so they were 6 and 8 when Davy died, and you know, there was never any input or, like, trying to fix it from them. It was like they both have a lot of empathy, especially my son. He really, like, notices. He's the younger one, but he would kinda be like, "Are you okay, mommy?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm just sad. I just miss Uncle Davy." And, you know, he'd say, "Yeah, I miss him too," and give me a hug and say, "Oh, I really miss when we used to go to the beach with Uncle Davy and walk down to the tide pools and poke sea anemones," or, just that level of patience and just like, "Yeah, I'm here for you. Here's a hug." Over and over and over. Infinite patience about it. I just had, last month was my grief anniversaries. He died and his birthday is in February, and so, February just sucks, and it's February. It's like nobody feels great in February unless
Yeah.
you, like, take a vacation. So, I did not take a vacation this year, and so I just felt like crap all of February, and, especially on his death anniversary, there's just, like, really not a lot good about that day or the days leading up to that day, and so, even now 3 years later, like, my kids are just like, "Oh, yeah." Like, "Oh, I miss him too. I love him." Just kind of that, like, infinite patience, and I would say in the acute grief phase is just taking logistics off of people's plates. I just think it's, like, so awful and traumatizing how fast we have to, like, come up with a funeral and just all the, like, death certificates and just all the bank accounts and just all these logistics, so I think anything that you can take off of people's plate is helpful because, yeah, then that frees up more time for people to be able to just sit with their feelings, so I'd say those 2 things are probably the biggest.
Yeah. Those are massive, huge, huge parts. And I'm so glad you're emphasizing them here. So, like the ongoing, not just patience, but I hear real like normalizing of your feelings in the empathy that you're getting with your kids. And I'm sure you're getting it from other places too, but I love the shining example that they are for this of, like, yeah, you're still going through it. And yeah, I miss him too. Like that's normal for that to be happening. I wish he was still here too. Like that kind of that level of empathy where it's not just, oh, I see you're having some hard feelings, oh, you poor thing, like where it becomes more like sympathy, but even the level of, yeah, it's normal for us to still be missing him, for us to still be missing our person. That's I can feel like the transformativeness in that kind of support, in the way that would just be such a powerful balm to our process, however often we're met with that again and again and again over time, like here, even 3 years out and beyond. Also, yeah, that early period where, you know, it's really kind of absurd what we expect grieving people to be able to do in the days and weeks and, first few months after this cataclysmic experience they've been through. If their house burned down, we wouldn't expect them to do that kind of stuff. If they, live through, natural disasters of one kind or another, we wouldn't expect that. Even in some cases, I think we're gentler when someone has a baby, in the birth, in those few weeks after birth, 6 weeks after birth, than we are when someone is going through a grieving process. But I do think that we could hold it very similarly to someone who's like, they need the food train after they've given birth. They need someone to like help with the laundry. They need someone to help bring them things or get things or do things for them. And as grievers, we need that too. I don't know if it's fair to use the word incapacitated, but for many of us, that's how powerful our grief is. That it's hard to do anything else. And so, like you're saying, whatever we can take off of the proverbial plate of someone in their early weeks and months of their grieving process can be such a kindness, such a useful way to support them. Just doing the things they otherwise would have to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
This show, Full-Time Grievers, is really about, you know, giving space for us grievers to have the ongoing processes that we need to do our grieving the way that's right for us, to get the support that is right for us, and to navigate our grief without abandoning ourselves, not rushing, not suppressing, not trying to get back to who we were before. In your own processes, and maybe it would be with Davy, but it might have been in one of the other processes that you mentioned too. Has there been a time when you were tempted or found yourself kind of turning away from yourself in your own process? And were there things that helped you either come back to or stay with yourself?
You know, I haven't been tempted to turn away from myself very much. I honestly think I've stayed pretty true to myself. I did have to after Davy died, I drank for about 2 months and then I made a like solid decision. I'm not going to drink for 6 months because I'm just numbing. So that was a really good decision for me. It was also a good decision for me to have drinks right after he died. I felt like that was the right I think that that was fine, for me.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Hmm.
I think that was kind of like a staying true to myself, like, I know that I don't wanna numb, I know that one of my I felt very much in survival mode a lot, and my survival response to that was flight. That's what I wanted to do. I have a lot of fight, but Davy's death didn't bring out any fight. I just, it's kinda like, I just don't wanna feel this, so when I realized that and decided, "Okay, I'm just gonna go 6 months totally alcohol free so I can really feel all these feelings," that was kind of a declaration of me staying true to myself. And then once I got into to do receiving sound healing, that it kind of, like, forces authenticity because it just, like, brings out all this truth. It doesn't really like, sound healing doesn't allow emotions to stay stuffed. It kind of, like, lets them come up. So that is kind of the more I've learned and the more I've gone into especially biofield tuning, it's just, like, forced me to stay truer and truer to myself, like, even the things that I don't wanna acknowledge or I wanna push aside, it just kind of, like, doesn't let me do that. I would say, yeah, it was more just I was more resentful of other people that, I knew how to stay true to myself, and other
Hmm.
people, would kind of, I just put these, like, little expectations on me or not want me to do things my way or just kind of be the old Karen, like, "Hey." And it's like, well, you know what? I wrote down one of my favorite quotes because I think I knew it would fit into this conversation somewhere. So at the end of Lord of the Rings, and Davey was a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I am also. But at the end, Frodo goes, back to the Shire and he's in his little hobbit hut. And he says, I'll read the quote that he says. He says, How do you pick up the threads of an old life? How do you go on when in your heart you begin to understand there is no going back? There are some things that time cannot mend, some hurts that go too deep, that have taken hold. And when I heard that, when I was watching Lord of the Rings not too long after Davy died, I was like, yep, there's no going back. This one this one went too deep. You can't go back. You can't pick up the threads of your old life. Like, I can't ever be that person again. Like, in that same form, like, she's just not here anymore because I was hurt, like, too deeply. It was just too big of a loss. So, but that doesn't, and that's kind of what I'm learning very recently, is that that doesn't mean that I have to bury my head in the sand and just be in this, like, heavy grief for the rest of my life. Because, like I said, I keep getting these messages that feel like, "Yeah, it's okay, you can feel joy again." Like, you can actually, I remember the first time that I felt joy after Davy died, and it was in Puerto Rico, and I had been surfing almost every day, and one morning it was like I got up early, drove down to the beach. I was one of the first ones there, and the waves were just like perfect. And I was like putting the wax on my board and getting ready to go out, and then I felt this thing, and I was like, "Ugh," like, so uncomfortable. I was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's excitement." I was excited, like, I was, like, joyful, excited to go paddle out, and I was like, "Oh, like, I can't feel that, like, Davey's dead. I can't feel excited and joyful." But I was like, "Oh, alright, we'll just paddle out and surf." But it felt like such a
Mm.
foreign feeling, and now, just kinda normal life, it's just like a theme that I'm visiting. I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe I can start feeling some joy again." It's a weird one to give yourself permission to do.
Yeah. I just love the way that you answered that question. I don't think there's anything that I want to add to it. I appreciate every little piece you got to there. And it's just such a beautiful reflection of the ways that we can be with ourselves, not turn away from ourselves in our grieving process, and how you've continued to stay with yourself throughout. Mm, thanks for speaking to that. So, and sort of like along those lines, and thinking about how we don't go back. We don't, especially if the grief is of the right size, let's say, or the profound enough meaning to us, we are forever changed. If we sort of turn that in on itself for a second, are there things now that you believe about grief that maybe contradict what you believed before, or what you had maybe learned from culture before about grief itself?
Yeah. Well, I think that I've just come to understand grief as being very sacred, and it's yours alone, really. No one else can experience it for you or change the way you experience it. Like, it's sacred, and it's between you and that person that passed away. I think the beginning of the process is really critical. I think especially like the first 6 months, 6 months to a year, but really the first 6 months, it's like you can't get that time back. It's a sacred time. It almost feels like there's like a portal open, or just some connection between you and that person that you're grieving. And that's gonna kinda start to close up with time a little bit. it's just not the same after a certain amount of time.
Mhm.
So I think it's really sacred, and even all those anniversaries, we're talking about society and other people's expectations. I'm sure society would, find it sort of ridiculous, where I go mentally in February, but I intend to go there in February every year in some way, maybe not for all of February, but it's like, you know, on the anniversary of the day he died, I just that's like a holiday for me. That's it. Like I don't want to do anything that day, or if I want to do something, it's whatever I want to do to honor him. And on his birthday, that's sacred. So and nobody else is gonna tell me, hey, honor his birthday. Like I need to do that. Like I'm in charge of doing that.
Wow, yeah, so sacred. I really hear that, and that's really in like I don't know contradiction to just the heart or just something we don't want to feel or something that we need to stop or anything like that. So I really feel how that the sort of shift in the way that you might hold anyone's grieving process when you think of it as now a sacred thing. Well, that's huge. It reminds me, and even some of what you were saying before when you were reading the quote from Frodo.
Although
uh, yeah, Frodo. Patti Smith, the musician, I heard her in an interview not that long ago, and she referred to the sacred scars that we have from grieving. She referred to her own sacred scars. She doesn't want them to heal. She wants to tend them. She wants to continue tending them, even though it's been decades now since she suffered the initial loss or losses, or multiple ones. And I read some of that in what you're sharing here too. Like it's not something that we should be or I don't know that you want to be treating as I'll eventually get rid of this. It's no, it's this is something I'm going to carry. This is something I want to carry with me, and the sacredness of it, I think, really speaks to the value of it rather than just something I have to carry now. I mean, it's like I'm cursed, No, it's something I want to do. I appreciate that so much, and there's been so many things that you've said here in this conversation that I think have been really vital, really useful for fellow full-time grievers out there. If you could say one thing to our fellow full-time grievers out there, maybe something that you'd want to hear or would have wanted to hear earlier in your grieving process, what would that be?
yeah, I would just really send some love to you all. It's a really lonely thing at times to be grieving, even if there's other people grieving your loved one, you're alone in your own grief. So I'd just like to send you some love for that. And yeah, I don't stuff your emotions. Feel them, and obviously there's appropriate times to feel them. You can't feel them all the time. Sometimes you got to stuff them for a little while and then set aside time to let them out whenever you can. But always better out than in, because if you keep them in, you'll get that anxiety ball or whatever it is that you get. I would say one thing that I would do a lot that I continue to do. I had a lot of rituals around Peter and Davy and my grandma too. But, sometimes it's just God, this is just sucks so much. There's no bright side. This is just so awful and wrong, and it just sucks. It's just the worst. And I feel like when I'm at that point, I I do something that like it just kind of like take you through what I do. So I close my eyes, I take a deep breath, and I just fill my heart up with love, whatever however you can do that. It might be thinking about your loved one that you lost, it might be thinking about your kids, it might be thinking about your dog. Just fill your heart up with love, you'll feel it. And then and then I imagine the person that I lost. And you could imagine that any way that you want to, depending on, what you believe and all that. I kind of imagine it with Davy. I just imagine him as like a little ball of light up in higher frequencies. And it doesn't look like him, but it feels like him. And I just focus my attention on sending my love to him. And I do
Mm.
that until I feel like he's received it. And at the same time, I usually feel like I receive some love back. And it's really subtle. And, you don't question it. When you feel it, you feel it. And that's what it is. And that's just something that's been really comforting to me. I just send him love and I feel it back. And I'm like, okay, there's just a little bit of comfort in that because it's like no matter what you believe, it's the worst thing ever that they're gone. But then, for me, there's like this little blessing that he's still there somewhere in a different form and I can still send him love. And that's kind of what it's all about. Like love never ends. And I think love is really the only thing that heals, and love heals all. So,
Sending out the love. I really appreciate that you sent that to everyone listening, and then you talked about a way that we could do that with our loved ones who have passed too. I can really identify with that. I definitely have rituals around doing similar things, and so I really appreciate you passing that along and sharing that with our people here.
yeah.
Karen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your truth with us. Can't say enough about how much I appreciate you being willing to be here today and to share so authentically with us all. Thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was really happy to be here. And yeah, it's good to talk about all these things that we don't talk about enough. So, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here and for giving yourself permission to grieve in the ways that are right for you. If this episode met you where you are, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll know when new episodes drop. And if someone came to mind while you were watching, please send this to them. They could probably use it. You can download our free grief journal, A Place to Put It Down, through the link below. And there you'll also find the link to share your own grief confessional for the show. And remember, you don't have to get over it. Just stay with yourself through it. I'm Nathan M. McTagg, and this is Full-Time Grievers.